First of all, I have to clean the case. Now the back of the case is frequently oily. That's oils that have sweated out of the grease in the focus helical typically. The inside of the case, where our moving plate goes in this recess, and above this is where the retainer plate goes, and the shutter blades are effectively on top of the retainer plate. The diaphragm blades below it. I've got some cotton there stuck under that bracket. See if we can get that out. That's better. So there's a little bit of grease in here intentionally on that detent spring, and the rest of it is unintentional transfer really from oils that have come through from the back of the shutter. But basically the case should be clean and dry. Just checking to see how well I've got that done. That looks okay. The retainer, the fixed retainer here, now this is quite marked. This is the underside, the side that faces the diaphragm blades. Now those fingerprints that are on there, I can feel that as I rub that cotton bud across there. I can feel the roughness of it. Now they will have some, they will make a difference to the way that diaphragm opens and closes. It means that it'll be a bit stiffer to open and close than it should be. Now of course this isn't a reflex camera. The diaphragm doesn't need to move at speed to close down to the set aperture as it would do in a reflex camera, but it means that if there's undue stiffness here, there's always at least the potential that the shutter speed and the aperture will come unclipped, and you might not notice that. So they should move smoothly, those blades, and they're not going to move smoothly over that roughness. So I'm going to have to polish this with a bit of metal polish. Brasso. Here's the moving plate anyway. This is the piece that swings the blades inwards or outwards depending on how you set things. This is quite oily. You can tell it's got quite an oily sheen to it. Now that's possibly a good sign, because if it's oily it won't be rusty. Got a few marks on it. So odd spots. But generally that's cleaning up well. That shouldn't cause me any problems. I'll give that one more clean over and then that's it. That one looks good. Only handling this right from the very edges so that I don't end up with my fingerprints etched into it. Someone here has also autographed this with a couple of little marks at this point, presumably so they knew where it went back in the shutter. Obviously that's the same person who autographed the other piece, and it points to the same thing, that they were not familiar with the shutter. Alright, that looks good. The blades are very marked. I'm just going to wipe one with some naphtha, see if that cleans up at all. It did. So those marks are on the surface. This one's not cleaning up so well. So these blades, I'm going to try cleaning these with naphtha. That one cleaned reasonably well. This one here is more marked, it doesn't appear to clean so well. I'll clean these with naphtha. Yeah, that one's got a lumpy look to it, like there's something on there. But it is like something, a deposit on the surface. I'll clean these blades and see how I get on. I may need to use something other than naphtha to clean these. They're pretty greasy. Well, the diaphragm blades cleaned up quite well, just with solvent. So I'm not going to polish them at all. But this mechanism plate, this retainer plate here, I will polish. I want to get rid of those marks. Not because they're ugly, although they are, but it's because the surface is rough and the blades won't move smoothly across it. So I'm starting with some metal polish. And as the roughness polishes away, you'll feel a change in the way that the cotton bud runs over that surface. It probably won't take much. Now this surface is where the diaphragm blades run against us. I think the top surface was quite good. Yeah, that looks fine. Okay, so now I'll clean that off with some naphtha, and hopefully that'll work much better. It might not look an awful lot better, but it'll work better. And this is important to remove all the traces of that metal polish from the rim. Because obviously you don't want traces of abrasive left inside the shutter. And very likely that metal polish has some ingredient in there to slow down the tarnishing process. So it's very likely it's got some waxes or something suspended in the solvent. And whatever those waxes might be, I don't want them in the shutters, so let's just get this cleaned down. This is the shutter blade side here. This is not the side that had all the marks on it. That was this side, and the marks are, you can still see where they were, but I can tell you that they're much reduced. And importantly, the cotton bud here just slides smoothly over the surface, which tells me that it's smooth. It may not be much prettier, but it's a much smoother surface. Right, so that's ready for reassembly, and I'll reassemble the diaphragm. I'll reassemble it on this jig that I've got here. and we have 5 diaphragm blades to go in. And these just lay one on top of another, anti-clockwise, until you get round to the near the start again. When you have to peel back the first blades to give you space to get the new blades in place. You have to swing those blades in over the top. With them in place, I need this piece. I know from experience that the pin on the moving plate here needs to be in this relationship to the pin on the retaining plate there. Then the case can go on the top. This only goes on one way. There's an extra little hole here which lines up with that pin on that retaining plate. A bit of a wriggle, it seems to be seated. Flip it over on the jig, lift the outside piece off, and that should be sitting in there. That looks good. I've got 3 retaining screws. They can go in, and it's important to do these retaining screws up very lightly in case one of those blades has become displaced. You don't want the blade getting trapped where it shouldn't be. You'll end up damaging the blade. So I do the screws up very lightly, then I can check that everything appears to be where it should be, check that things move, and all going well, I can come back and put the tighten the screws up and check again. Take that off. Just looking, I can see the pins there in that plate, so nothing got disturbed there. Check that the diaphragm will open and close smoothly. It does, but it's not exactly smooth. Tighten the 3 screws up. Check that diaphragm again. That's not as smooth as I'd like it to be. We know it's not stuck with oil or grease now, and we know everything's clean, but it's not moving smoothly. I'm going to put a bit of graphite powder in there and work it backwards and forwards. I'm interested in where these pins, visible here, run in those tracks on the moving plate. And there may be extra friction in there, particularly since I've done such a thorough job of cleaning these. There's probably absolutely nothing that vaguely looks like lubricant. Just drop a little bit of graphite powder in there, rotate this so that it settles evenly around that plate. Move this inwards and outwards, just get that lot worked in. Now, that's a good result. That's very, very smooth in its action. I've now got to go and blow all that any loose graphite powder out of there, and there'll be a bit. It'll take a bit to see the back of it. But this moves really nicely now. No effort at all. Well, that's really nice now. That moves really nice and smooth. So that part's done. I can put that to one side and have a look at this mechanism plate. Well, I did say that whoever had been in here didn't really know what the hell they were doing. Now here, it's got big scratch marks. That looks like, I was going to say it looks like a number 3, but it's back to front for that, so I don't know what's going on here. But there's scratch marks in that plate. Now that's anodised aluminium. It's pretty tough. None of those marks got there by themselves. Nothing happened there accidentally. Somebody did that. They did it with a purpose, but I don't know what their purpose was. As I run the toothpick across here, this feels rough. There's a deep scratch there. So that's very interesting. I can't say I've seen that before. Right, well, I'll clean this with naphtha. Unless there's a raised patch here, it won't make any difference, but it's not a good look. I don't know who'd do a thing like that. I don't know whether somebody was marking it so they knew where things went back. This definitely looks like a number 3. Well, that would be number 2 then. That's what I'm looking at there, and that would be a number 1 there. So they've numbered it where the blades were going back to, or where they thought the blades were going back to. What a crazy thing to do. They could have done that with a pencil. If they'd done that with a pencil, there'd be no problem. They've scratched those numbers in there with the tip of a tweezers or a screwdriver or something. Oh, I don't know. I've never seen that before in my life. Okay, I'll clean these parts up. They need to be, surprise, surprise, free from oil and grease, dust, dirt and other contaminants, and then I can reassemble them. And this should have been the least controversial part of the whole job, really. There's not much oil coming off on here. Well, it's anyone's guess how long ago somebody made a mess of this. Okay, well, I suppose we can be thankful that they didn't feel the need to also mark positions for blade number 4 and 5. Otherwise we'd even more scratches to worry about. So this lens tube here holds the blade actuating ring in place. and the blade actuating ring runs around this groove here. Around the top here, that's where the internal curved rack runs, and also the shutter speed settings cam plate. So that all needs to be clean and free from rubbish. And here we got the blade actuating ring. This is the piece that swings backwards and forwards and swings the blades inwards or outwards to open and close the shutter. And this piece appeared to me to be a little bit greasier than normal, though the mechanism plate as a whole was not. It was probably lacked grease where I'd normally expect to see it. Well, at least there's no corrosion here. Right, so the mechanism plate, let's get this piece on anyway. So there's our detent spring. Let's hook this in under the detent spring. It's seated. Hook the detent spring over the post on that blade actuating ring. Now this piece only goes on in one orientation. One of the posts is carved away at the edge where it goes against that thing. There's 3 screws. One of them's longer than its mates. The long screw goes through on the bracket that holds the main spring. So this is a short screw. This is a short screw here. Here's our bracket. And the long screw goes through there. So there's not much in that. There's probably a 1/4 of a millimetre, something like that, in terms of length difference. If you put a long screw where the short screw should be, it'll stick out through the mechanism plate, catch on shutter blades, and things won't work. If you put a short screw where the long screw should be, it'll only be partly through the mechanism plate, so it won't be engaging many threads, and as a result it's likely to strip out. So it's important to get those 3 screws in their correct positions. Well, that's together. I'm going to lubricate this with a little bit of graphite powder and then deal with my shutter blades. Lubricate this with a bit of graphite powder, as I've said. It's not the only way to do this job, it's the way that I prefer. One of the advantages of using graphite over using grease or something like that is graphite never goes sticky. I'll go and blow the excess out. I don't know what to make of these shutter blades yet, whether they'll clean up well with a bit of naphtha or whether they're going to need to be polished. So I'll start by attempting to clean them and see what we get. I can certainly still see the marks on those blades. They're not bad. That one's more marked. See what the other side of the blades look like. This one here is the worst. I think I'll polish those with some metal polish. Probably the best thing to do here. This blade here is certainly the worst. It's had a blob of something there, and you can see where the fungus or whatever it is etched into the blade. You may not be able to see that there. Yeah, there you can. See that dark patch in the middle of the blade? That's where the fungus was. And it would have been growing in the oil that was present on the surface of the blade. I don't think the fungus has got any particular interest in the steel. Right, I'll start with some metal polish. And this is a hard foam block that I've got this blade on, which is stiff enough to keep the blade suitably flat. There's a bit of yield to it. I've just got to work through all these blades in turn and then clean them carefully with Naphtha and see what sort of a result I get. I expect it'll be an improvement. They're not, the surface of the blades doesn't feel rough generally. That's what you get when there's a lot of corrosion present, is you end up, the blades are rough. And you can feel that when you go to clean them. I'm not getting that here. Okay, well I'll clean these 5 blades up and swab them with Naphtha and show you what we get. Well, those blades all look good now. There seems to be, there are no visible marks on those blades at all. The surface looks great. So that's a good result. And they can be assembled to the mechanism plate now, which of course is all lubricated and ready to go. So I'll just check that this is in the blades open position. It is. And start putting the blades in place. Blade number 1 goes here. Blade number 2 does go here. Where the scratched markings suggest. Blade number 3 does in fact go there. I can only assume that this shutter was butchered back before the days of the internet, when information was not so easily come by. Okay, there's our blades in position, and I can put the case over the top, which only goes on in one position, and it's not hard to see where it's going to go. Three screws, and as usual I don't do the screws up tight until I've checked to make sure that absolutely nothing got displaced while I was putting the case over the top. It's not something that happens very often, but I can think of one occasion in the last couple of years when I flipped the shutter over and went to check to see if the blades closed properly, and they didn't because one had moved. That's fine. And so it was fortunate that I hadn't tightened up the screws and damaged anything. Okay, so our blades are in place. Shutter opens and closes nicely. You can see those blades are good. They look just like new shutter blades. The diaphragm, that looks pretty good. It doesn't look like new diaphragm blades, but they're a marked improvement over what they were. Right, now I can start reassembling the componentry to the mechanism plate here, starting with the springs, which is always fun.